Collective Whisper podcast with Simon King. Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode. On this episode, I'd like to welcome Flo McSweeney. Flo McSweeney was born in December 1960 in Dublin, Ireland. She is a musician, actress and presenter known for TV shows such as Megamix, No Frontiers, Separation Anxiety and Garth Bev. She has sang with Moving Hearts and has released her own solo material in the last few years. She has 2 children, Mia and Luke, with husband, actor, comedian, writer Barry Murphy. Okay, welcome to the show, Flo. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Greetings from a grey Ireland, grey Dublin.
Well, you've had some nice weather over the last few weeks, though, haven't you?
We had, like everybody went mad with excitement. But we had about 10 days of really tropical weather, like really warm at night, everyone sleeping with the windows wide open. I personally found it too hot. I can't cope with too much heat, but I had a wonderful swim with my sister down at Killiney Beach at 9 o'clock one evening, and that was amazing. Just to be able to do that, and you kind of had to pinch yourself and think, this is Ireland. So it was lovely. No, but for me, 20 to 22 degrees, that's warm enough. So I wouldn't last in Spain very long.
Yeah, well, it's funny, just as you mentioned about the weather and the different, climates. It's because when I was in Madrid there, in summer, it's crazy warm. I mean, it's 44 degrees sometimes. And the thing about it is that it's very dry heat. So if you're in the shade, it's not as bad. But now I've moved to Alicante, and in Alicante, it's humid. So at night, you're like sweating, you have the fan on. It's like being in Cuba. Maybe not as bad, but it's a bit like that. So it's taken me a little bit of time to get used to it, you're just the difference. But it does remind me of being at home in Ireland when you get that very humid, heavy weather when it's warm, that kind of similar by the coast.
We do, and we quite a lot of rain yesterday, and I went outside yesterday evening, and it was that lovely, I love that summer's evening when you can smell the soil from the heat and the rain, and that's a real Irish summer smell.
And so like for you at the moment, obviously with, all of the restrictions over the last nearly 2 years now, have a lot of things stopped for you at the moment? Are you kind of staying in the house a lot, or how is it?
I'm double vaccinated now, so I am a little bit more I wouldn't say kind of like easy about where I go, but I am going out more. I went to lunch on Sunday, and that was my first time in a restaurant in a year and a half, in 18 months. But I mean, the things that have stopped are obviously music. I mean, both my husband and I have always worked in this industry, and, March 2020, within 10 days, less than 10 days a week, every little bit, every gig that we had, everything was just gone. And, I can see through Arts Council grants, and, there are venues that I would have played in that are sort of, opening up again, or, doing gigs, and they've got grants from the Arts Council, and they're filming bands and filming different groups in there. But that work hasn't trickled down to me. There's a lot of, there are so many musicians here, everybody kind of looking for the same gig. So it's hard, and I don't expect, I think it will be this time next year before, we get back to normality in the music industry. And of course, Electric Picnic was just cancelled. Well, it wasn't granted its license.
I was just going to say that to you because it's kind of a little bit of, double standards and stuff when you see the GAA, knocking Gaelic football or GAA. But it's crazy when you have these double standards for horse racing, GAA, different things. And then when you look at the arts, they have this kind of lockdown still going. And how can 40 or 50,000 people go to Croke Park for a football match? But, for example, they can't do it for a concert.
Exactly.
Which you could have Garth Brooks there or something else, but they say, no, because it's music, no.
I know. I think, I mean, I could be wrong because I don't have an in, but I think that maybe the organisers, when they were applying for the electric picnic licence, and they had expected that they would have 70,000 over the 3 or 4 days. I mean, obviously that's not realistic, but I assume that they probably thought that the council would come back with, no, well, you can have 30,000. So whether or not they will apply again or try and push for 30,000, there's no reason why, it can't go ahead at a smaller capacity, you know,
Yes.
just make it a smaller festival. It's sad and it's very difficult because there are so many people that this affects. It's not just the musicians; it's all the tech crew. It's all the people. There are so many people that work in the arts industry that aren't front of house on stage. And it's sad to hear of musicians having to possibly look at other careers, and people are.
And that you said it, there are other careers, because especially for a lot of musicians who are middle aged, in their 40s and 50s, I mean, it's very hard to change career. And if you're a gigging musician, if you're doing weddings or cover bands, or doing theater as an actor, and you're just like not famous and not earning the big bucks, but earning a living and surviving, and then all of a sudden that's taken away, and of course they give you the pup, but that's just a means to an end. You're surviving, but you can't really better yourself. And I think for a lot of musicians and actors and people like that, they're kind of have been in limbo for the last 2 years, no?
Absolutely. And the fact that you mentioned people it's like the jobbing musician, and there are thousands of them in Ireland who work in wedding bands. I know some musicians who work in 2 or 3 different bands, and they make a reasonable living, and they are the ones not considered. So I do feel that, the Minister for Arts, when they give, the Arts Council give X amount of money, it goes to the same people. They're not looking at the jobbing musicians, the ones who literally go out at the weekend and work Friday, Saturday, Sundays. They're the ones that, to me, who are most affected. The famous ones and the successful ones will always survive because they'll come back. But it's for those people on the ground, as it were. It's so difficult.
Yeah, because the thing about, obviously, if you were very successful before and you were an actor and you were getting paid big money for movies, you have like a nest egg maybe, or you have something to fall back on. So even if it was 5 years of a lockdown, you maybe you have enough in the bank. But for the majority of people, they don't have that privilege where they're living either week to week or month to month. And they might have some savings, but that goes very quickly when you don't have work.
Yeah, and also especially, for, you mentioned like people, older musicians, and hands up, I'm one of those. Any money that you have saved, you sort of think, well, that's towards when I, a little bit down the line, when I retire, as it were, and that's gone, because we've been living off what we've put away, which isn't a huge amount. But so it's not just the immediate future and the getting back to work; it's the growing old phase that's the part that's scary. The future feels a lot more uncertain, and it's very horrible to go forward into your future with that uncertainty when you've reached a certain age.
Yeah, well, the thing about it is, isn't it, that if you put money away in the bank, whether it's 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000, and you say, okay, that's going to be for either that flat I wanted to buy in Greece, or it's going to be for my pension, or it's going to be for whatever you planned it for. It's always a shame when something else comes along that some kind of surgery or something maybe you have to pay out for, unknown, and it comes to you, and then you have to spend that money. It's always a shame, but it's a worse shame when that's your retirement money and you're having to live off that now, and you're watching it dwindling away.
Yeah, absolutely. And that money now, I'm laughing when you're saying for that flat I'd like to buy in Greece. It's more for that box of cornflakes I'd like to buy. That's what the money is. There's no flat money put away.
No, there's two ends of the scale. There's the people who are worried about not getting the flat in Greece, and the other people who are looking at which brand of cornflakes to buy.
Yeah, exactly. That's the brand. That's the category I'd be in. The cornflakes one. I might be able to, maybe crunchy nut cornflakes.
Maybe crunchy nuts. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing, and it's funny because we've come down to that now in the world where, hopefully there won't be shortages in the future, but there could be. But now when you go in and you're kind of thinking, okay, how much money I have to spend and so on, and you're looking at the brands and the differences in the prices, and I see it so much, even in Spain here, you see people come in with nice cars, but they have the phone out and they have the calculator, and they're totting up every price because they know what their budget is to spend, and they know they can't go over it. And I mean, in the past, people mightn't have done that because they'd be like, oh, well, we can live on that or whatever. But now people really have to watch the pennies because you don't know what's coming in the next few months or years.
No, we really don't. And with the virus as well, I sort of, I mean, it's wonderful. I don't know what it's like in Spain, but over 70% of the population here have been vaccinated. And even though our numbers are at, I think yesterday there were about 1,400, which is high, the hospital and the ICU rate is staying the same and is low enough. So it's showing that the vaccine is working. But we really don't know. I mean, I would get the flu jab every year, but I have to get it every year. So I'm assuming that we are all going to have booster jabs, and there will very likely be other variants. So we don't know how long we're going to have to live with this for, and ultimately how effective the vaccines are going to be. That really is time is going to tell that. So, and I always think when you're heading into winter is just different. I have two kids. I have a 24-year-old and a 19-year-old, and my 19-year-old is doing music and French in UCD, and she spent her first year in her room doing her lectures from her room, and I'm hoping that she will go to college in September. But what worries me is, these are I suppose the little things, but because they've been so kind of wrapped in cotton wool and being at home, that when they actually go to college, they're going to pick up every virus going. And you'll wonder, one will wonder the effectiveness of the vaccine when the kids go back to school and when winter comes.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was saying it to a few people over the last few months that, however hard it is on, certain age groups with the lockdown and restrictions, there are some people who are in their middle ages, and they're middle aged, and it's kind of semi-retirement. They're thinking, I don't know, will I go back to work or what will happen? But the hard part is for the younger people who are thinking, okay, I have to study from home, and maybe they're not getting the chance to travel. So it's quite tough on them. And I mean, they can't even have, the same type of parties a lot of the time. I know it's eased a little bit, but it was kind of sad. I remember there a few months ago, my nephew having his 21st, and I was laughing. I was saying to him, wow, I said, you didn't think you'd have your 21st sitting around eating cookies and biscuits with your mom watching the TV, So things have changed in the last while as regards how they can celebrate.
I think for young people, it's a tragedy. I think it's a tragedy I really do feel so sorry for them, because particularly, say, college-going kids, and they're like my daughter in her first year, that's when you meet your people. That's when you find your group that you might have for life. And her degree is only a 3-year degree, so she's going into year 2, and she hasn't met one single person that she's doing a course with. So her friend group is quite small from school, and I think that's really difficult. That's tough.
That is hard. It is hard. Like you said there, if you're going into your second year and you haven't met anybody, that's really strange, isn't it? And
isn't it?
It doesn't give people confidence, because you get confidence from meeting people and, discovering who you are and who you want to be. But obviously, if you're not meeting those people, you're in your own world a lot of the time, aren't you?
Oh, completely. And I mean, we've been lucky with my daughter because she is really disciplined, and she was there at her desk every morning doing her lectures live, and she got through it, and she did kind of have some group chats with people on her course that she's spoken to. So but she's dying to get to college. So I'm keeping everything crossed that things will go okay, and that they will we'd be able to stay on top of this virus and that the vaccinations will ultimately work and that people can just get back to living their lives.
Hopefully that will, for her sake and everybody else's sake too. So listen, Flo, we'll go back in time a little bit. So we'll tell us that you were born in Dublin, yes?
I was actually born in Cork.
Oh, were you?
I was, yeah. My parents, my father is from Bantry, and my mother is from Glanmire. My father is actually Terence McSweeney, named after the Lord Mayor who died on hunger strike. My father was like Bantry was at that time. It was like it may as well have been Dublin to Cork. He was born in 1924. He's no longer with us, but he had two siblings, and his mother died in childbirth when he was 3. So he was sent to Cork to an aunt and uncle who had no children, and they ran a little kind of like, it was like a nursing home called Glenvera. It's still there. And so he only saw his father twice a year, but he was very lucky because, he came from kind of poverty. My grandfather was a small farmer. So because his aunt and uncle had no children, they poured everything, all their love and their money into my dad, and they sent him to a private school and he was educated. And then my mother is one of 9 children. She died 3 years ago. She was the last surviving member of her family. She lived to be 93. So we moved. My father was in the clothing industry, and we moved to Dublin when I was 3 to a place called Cabinteely. So, yeah. So I consider myself Dublin, but really my roots are firmly entrenched in Cork, and all my relatives are there. I spent a lot of time as a child in Cork. I used to come back with the accent after a few weeks. Oh, yeah.
It's a great mixture, isn't it? The Dublin accent and the Cork accent.
Yeah. Well, my mother had quite a generic accent, I thought, when we were growing up. But when she would get irate or annoyed, she would go completely Cork. So we'd know when she was on the warpath because the accent would come out.
For sure. And so what was life growing up in Cabinteely for you like? What was this? Were you a quiet child?
Yeah, I was easily distracted. I'm a twin. I have a twin brother, Patrick, and we are the youngest of 5. So there's 9 years between us and our eldest sibling. And we went to, lived in a place called Shrewsbury Lawn, and right behind the wall of our back garden was the Ursuline Convent in Cabinteely, which later became Cabinteely Community School. So I went there. I was not at all academic. When I look back on it, I think I was easily given up on. I was brutal at maths, really good at English. I loved English, but from a very young age, I loved singing and dancing and music and musicals and everything. I couldn't stay still. But when it came to actually doing work, I would sit in a classroom and stare out the window. I was known as a dreamer. We sold my mother's house a couple of years ago, and we found in the attic all my school reports, and they were all the same from sort of age 5 to age 18. If Florence took her head out of the clouds, she could do very well, but my head were always firmly in the clouds. Still are.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because when you look back at, people who went on to work in the arts and in different types of traditional cultural jobs, you kind of, you think to yourself, when they were in school, the teachers would say, oh, they're dreamers, daydreamers, they have to get their feet back on the ground, like you said, your head is in the clouds and all of those things. But for teachers, it's quite hard to deal. Now it's a little easier, but it's quite hard to deal with because maybe the teacher can't see what they're dreaming about. And if the child doesn't speak about it, they're like trying to get them back to a place where they can teach them, but they're maybe thinking of stardom or being in the Olympics or whatever.
Yeah. I never thought of this whole idea of, and the way kids are nowadays, of wanting to be famous. That was never in my head. It was just, I just found I had no interest in academia. In a maths class, good luck, I was gone. My head was gone. I always engaged when it came to English and history. I loved literature. I loved Shakespeare. I loved history. But every other subject, sorry, that's my phone ringing in the background, which will be answered by my husband upstairs.
Don't let him fall down the stairs now trying to answer.
No, he asked one upstairs, and I said to him, would you please answer it? Okay. So I was a daydreamer. I was fidgety. It doesn't suit every child to sit in a room for 8 hours being talked at, and it really didn't suit me. That's why when I look at my daughter, I think, where does she get her discipline, her own self-discipline from? And she does. She's an extraordinary amount of discipline. But it's funny because nowadays, if you were, artistic, it's cherished and it's encouraged in a lot of schools. Whereas back in I was in school in the late 60s or 70s. I left school in 1979. But it was like your creativity was never nurtured, never. It was pushed aside. So I always felt kind of lesser than when I was in school, because I felt, I'm not very bright, whereas I was hugely bright, and I'd like to think are reasonably articulate, but that my gifts weren't treated as gifts. They were treated as like they were nothing. That's all nonsense, and that's that.
It is, but I think even in the majority of schools nowadays, they know how to deal with it better. And obviously, being an artist in whatever kind of area you're in is looked on, in a more favourable light than it used to be. But there is still that kind of mentality, even amongst parents and amongst teachers, where you could be a star, but you're going to have to work really hard. And maybe it's not worth it, and just focus on the ground level stuff and get the basics and then do that. So that's great in one way, but it also does kill the dream a little bit, because it's like all the famous people in the world, somebody told them, oh, you can't do that, or you won't be able to do that. But a lot of the time they had to struggle on, and and that's the way life is. There's always going to be someone that's going to try to bring you back down, not always in a negative way, but in a more realistic way, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to admit, I'm probably a little guilty of it myself as an adult with my own children, because, I remember the struggles I had, and that, arriving at the age that I'm at, and still a certain level of uncertainty. So there's a part of me that would like my kids to have stability, the kind of stability that I never had. So I suppose there is always someone, even your mother, who's a singer, to give you a reality check. But my daughter would be she's studying music in UCD, but she talks about teaching, and she'd like to teach music at secondary school level and then have long summer holidays and be in a band. And I thought, oh, I wish I was that together at that age, to think like that.
Just looking at your family right now, you have Mia and Luke. You have 2 children, is it?
That's right, yeah. Luke is 24 and Mia is 19.
One of them is there, or are they both away?
They're both here. Lockdown. My son had just finished a degree when the first lockdown happened, and he was working part-time in a restaurant. His kind of big interests are sort of film editing, and that's what he would like to do. But it's like his life has been put on hold for the last couple of years. So, I think he has to kind of look now and decide whether he will go away for a couple of years and travel. I'm a big believer in, like, when you're in your 20s, go travel, live your life, have fun, and then, come back and see, he might go back to further education. He hasn't really decided yet, whereas my daughter is, as I said, in, UCD. So she's got another couple of years to go. I think her plan is then to do a master's in music education. So that's her plan. Things change, of course, could all change. She might decide she's going to run away and join the circus, which is what I did at 19. I went off with a dance troupe, a dance company, when I think of it, I was 19, and I'd finished school, scraped through school, and didn't even really scrape. And I joined a band when I was 17, and I said to my mother, that she made me promise I could be in a band if I promised to do a secretarial course. And that was a thing for a lot of young women to do in the early 80s. So I did a secretarial course in a little school on just over Charlemont Bridge. And I had to learn typing, which I was brutal at, and shorthand, which I was even more brutal at. And with shorthand, I used to make up my own, and it looked great on the page, but I couldn't read it back. So I was never going to be somebody's secretary. So then I got a job while I was doing the secretarial course over the bridge in McConnell's advertising agency. The building isn't even there anymore, but they were the biggest ad agency in the 70s and 80s in Dublin. And I was a receptionist. And I think I left my secretarial course early and went to work in McConnell's full time. And while I was there, I saw an ad in a paper where my old dance teacher was holding auditions for a dance company that were going to Germany and Italy. And I rang her and she said, I said, I'm not good enough to be in the dance company, but I'd love to come and do a class. So I did the class, and at the end of the class, she offered me the job. And my parents were away in Cork for 10 days. And when they came back, I told them that I'd given up my job and I was joining a dance troupe that was going to Germany and Italy. So I may as well have told my mother I was joining the circus. And there was nothing they could do about it or talk me out of it. And I was only 19. And I think in some ways because of my mother's lack of life experience in the way that me now as a mother, I've seen everything. So my daughter couldn't pull the wool over my eyes about anything. And if she told me she was joining a dance troupe now, I would block the door with my body. So my mother had no idea what kind of thing I was getting into. And I mean, it was I was away for about a year and a half. And it was wild, mad, and utterly mental, the whole thing. But I came back I'd grown up, that's for sure. I saw a lot.
I think in that kind of scenario, when you run away with the circus or join a dance troupe, you're exposed to a whole new world, good and bad. I mean, hopefully all pretty good, but you do learn a lot. And I'm sure when you came back to your mother, you were a different person.
I was, and in a good way. I mean, we got into a few sort of scrapes, and some of the places we worked in were dubious kind of clubs with dubious, dodgy owners and the like, and dubious clientele. And so, yeah, you had to grow up very fast to learn to take care of yourself, which I did. And so I came back, and I wanted normality when I came back. I just thought, there was such nearly 2 years of traveling Germany and Italy. So when I came back, I joined, I was going to say another dance troupe. No, I didn't. I took a job in a hairdresser, Pizzazz Hair Design, which was in the Paris Court Townhouse Centre, and as a receptionist. I wasn't a hairdresser, and I was there for about a year and a half. And while I was there, I got seriously into music, and I joined bands. And I was in a band called Toy with Rhythm, and we won a competition that was run by Maxell tapes. So that gives you an idea of how old it was. And I think about 2,000 bands entered. There were that many bands, or maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe it wasn't, it was probably 200. But, every time I tell the story, I add another zero. There were 200,000 bands entered. And we won. And our prize was that we had a single released. I can't remember the name of the label, but it was recorded in Windmill Lane with Bill Whelan of Riverdance fame as the producer. And that was when I first met Bill Whelan. And then I ended in a long kind of working relationship with Bill over the years. Throughout the 80s, I'd say I sang on every band that Bill Whelan produced. I would do backing vocals. But I was still working in a hairdresser at the time, and they were very tolerant because we were gigging, and I'd be gigging on a Friday night, have a few beers afterwards. We'd end up in Susie Street down on Leeson Street, and I'd forget to come into work the next day. I'd get a call at 11 o'clock. The salon has been open since 9. They were really tolerant because I would have fired my ass, that's for sure. So, and then I think when we won the competition, we all thought naively this was the entry into the big time, and I left my job. That was the last proper job that I ever had, apart from television, presenting.
Yeah,
But yeah,
if you call television a proper job.
yeah. Well, as I call it, my proper clocking in job. That sort of. Yeah. So and it was great, and they were very good to me in Pizzazz. They really were. They were so good to me.
It's funny that name Pizzazz. I remember around the country you'd see, like, I saw other hairdressers Pizzazz, and I used to always laugh at this, like, you'd imagine the old ladies go in for the blue rinse, or the women go in for the highlights, and they're like, Pizzazz, oh, it's done, perfect, and now you look like Pamela Anderson or whoever.
I do, yeah.
But the reality is you're waiting for a long time, and
absolutely. Oh yeah. Well, and I used to be, when I worked in Pizzazz, I used to be a willing guinea pig. I remember like working, my parents used to dread Mondays because I'd go into work on a Monday when it would be really quiet in the salon. So one of the owners was colorist, and he'd go, do you fancy going blonde today, Flo? And I had dark brown hair. And I think in a day I went from sort of, collar length brown hair to, by the evening, it wasn't blonde, it was the color. It took about 5 days to do. It was the color of pigmentation of kind of like pig skin. It had a sort of pinkish hue, and it was breaking off. And I mean, oh my God, when I think of what I used to do to my hair, and I cropped it, and then I wore it short then for the next 40 years, pretty much 30 years.
Yeah, because I remember seeing you on the television, obviously, in your TV shows, Megamix and some of these shows and everything. But I always thought you had this kind of like Blondie or Toya Wilcox kind of style, like your hair and everything.
And it's funny. It's so, at the time there weren't many people walking around with really cropped, spiky hair, and my hair was white. I mean, it's white now for a different reason, but it like bleached off my head. And I remember watching Top of the Pops one night and seeing the Eurythmics and Annie Lennox and that first single, Sweet Dreams, and she was in the man's pinstripe suit, and she was walking through a field of cows. And I remember seeing her and thinking, oh shit, because that was my look. In my head, that was my look, a sort of slightly androgynous, a masculine but yet feminine look. Annie Lennox basically had the look that, as far as I was concerned, I had, and she stole it from me.
Wow. Yeah, because I was going to say, like, that time, when you said you came back from the dance with the touring around Italy and Germany, what kind of, like, did you get into a certain type of music then that made you want to be a singer? What was the kind of bands or artists that influenced you?
Well, one of the things that happened when I was in Germany, I always think this sounds like a movie script. In one of the clubs that we worked in, we were in a place called Karlsruhe, and we worked in a club called the Rheingold, which is probably a bit like the Sugar Club, or one of those sort of, it had all these beautiful big leather booths, semicircular booths, and so there was a show twice a night, and they had the nightclub singer, who was called Ralph Bunchkin, and they had the girl singer.
Great name.
Great name. And Ralph was this, he was the kind of perma-tanned, sort of long dark hair, schmoozy, slightly slimy cabaret singer. And then there was his female equivalent, which changed, but at the time there was a Filipino girl called Between, and so they had their backing tracks, and it was actually hilarious because Between's English was terrible, so she used to sing everything phonetically. So we'd all have great crack at listening to her sing. But anyway, she got laryngitis and she was out for a whole week, and the man who owned the club was called Ziggy Borscht, and he was like, I have no singer. And then I said, I'll do it. And at that point I had been in my first band at 17, so I used her backing tracks, and then somebody gave me a long dress, so in between our sets as the dance troupe, I went out and did her stuff, and it was all Barbara Streisand's I Am a Woman in Love, but sung in German. Ich bin die Frau in der liebt, and which doesn't sound quite as romantic, and Sister sing it in German.
What really strikes me is that the poster outside, it would say between Flo
Yeah.
between Ralph Munchkin.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so that's, I mean, I suppose that was, I got a taste, and I mean, I'd had a taste of singing before. Singing was always my first love, but I tended to be a kid who was, my head was so easily turned. So when I was asked, did I want to be in a dance troupe, I said yes. And then, I got up and sang instead of between, and then I came home and I joined a band because I was asked. I never had much of a game plan, but when I came back, I do remember the sort of, I mean, I was listening to the music of the day, and I loved Talking Heads. I loved Japan. I loved Grace Jones, sort of Slave to the Rhythm, that sort of period. But I loved soul. I loved blues. I remember, I think it was through Bill Whelan doing an album, one of Freddie White's albums, and and I thought he was amazing. I thought Freddie White was amazing. So there was a lot of great Irish music that I loved as well. But I loved rock. I loved everything. And I'm still like that. I like to consider that my ears are open to all kinds of music.
Yes, and let's talk about obviously some of the groups. Les Enfants, Moving Hearts, Toy with Rhythm, and stuff. So with Les Enfants, you were with them for a while, but then you probably thought, this is not my thing, or I'm not into this, or what was that decision?
It was, I was in Toy with Rhythm first, and we were sort of, it's a shame really, because Ed Dara was the sort of main songwriter in Toy with Rhythm, and Ed wrote great pop songs, and she and I wrote some songs together, but I would have considered her the songwriting force in the band. And we were together a long enough time, like maybe 2 years, and which was 2 years is a lot when you're in your early 20s. And one of the guys in the band left, and things kind of were sort of beginning to fall apart a little bit. And then I suppose there was a little bit of a buzz about me. And so Les Enfants approached me and asked me to join the band. So when I look back on it now, I mean, there was the force of nature that was Derek Herbert, who was the main singer. And I don't think I should have joined a band where, there was two of us. But they, very quickly after I joined them, they got a management deal and they got a big record deal with an English company. And we went over to London to negotiate this deal, and they were all intent on signing on the dotted line, and I was still like, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure if I still want to stay in Les Enfants, or I would have been happy to do one album with them, but I didn't want to sign anything. So I think I walked out, and I got the boat. I got a bus to Holyhead, and I got the boat home. And by the time I arrived back in Dublin Port, the band were there to meet me. They had signed all the deals and had flown home, and they were basically there sort of with contracts. And I was going, I'm sorry, guys. So I left.
Okay.
And that was my short time with Les Enfants.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, though? Because when you look at those kind of decisions, and some people say, "Oh, you're mad! You should have done that." But things don't always turn out the way they imagine or you imagine. But you have to go with how you're feeling at that moment, and then decide later if it was the wrong or right decision.
I mean, well, I know it was the right decision, but I was a little bit all over the place. I don't think I really discovered until I hit my 40s who I was musically or what I wanted to do musically. It was just, there was so much going on in my early 20s, and I was getting, offers of all sorts of different kinds of work. It was just, and of course you think that's going to last forever, which it doesn't. But, it was just with Les Enfants, I just thought, I'm not ready to sign, like to hang my hat up with this band and be a part of this band and sign a deal that might tie me up for years. So I think it was the right thing for me then at that point.
And also something you mentioned there, when you have that kind of front person in the band and you're there as well, sometimes there's that kind of competitiveness between the singers. And sometimes you can be in a band and you say, well, we don't need two front singers, or the chemistry isn't as good between us. So maybe somebody goes, I'm going to step aside because I can't see it working.
Well, funnily enough, with Les Enfants, I think Derek and I had a great chemistry on stage. And I remember, I think what was his name? Oh, Joe Breen. He used to write with the Irish Times. He used to write the music reviews. And I remember he once wrote of a gig that I did with Les Enfants in Trinity College. And he said that Derek Herbert and Flo McSweeney had the kind of onstage chemistry that would make a bishop kick a hole through a stained glass window.
That's good.
Yeah. It was one of those weird quotes that I've always remembered. I can't remember my own name sometimes or what I had for breakfast, but I remember that.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, that was good. Yeah, I suppose, things happen for a reason and you just move on, So and then obviously Moving Hearts, started and there was a lot of members and everything. But tell us about then when you came into Moving Hearts and how it happened and the whole process.
Well, before I joined Moving Hearts, and how I met Moving Hearts was through Bill Whelan again. I was doing a session with Bill, and I remember we were doing an album. Was it an album or 3 or 4 singles with the Sligo band, Those Nervous Animals? And I was doing backing vocals on the session. And Owen O'Neill, the bass player with Moving Hearts, was working on that session. And I think Mick Hanley had just left. So I did the session. I had a great chat with Owen. We got on really well. And then I went to South America to sing in a song contest, basically with the song written by Brendan Graham. He of You Raise Me Up fame. And I love Gorgeous Man. And so the two of us went to South America. We were there for 10 days. And when I came back, I got a phone call from, I don't know, whichever member it was of Moving Hearts, asking me would I be interested in coming down to rehearsal and going from there. So like me being the way I was then was, yeah, okay. So I ended up joining Moving Hearts, which when I look back now, I mean, it was a wonderful experience and I was thrust straight into, I think one of the first gigs we did was a little mini tour with Van Morrison, culminating in finishing up in the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland with Freddie Hubbard, Van Morrison and Moving Hearts, which was a huge gig. And I was still only 23. And I said yes to that gig because I really didn't know a huge amount about Moving Hearts. I certainly knew little or nothing about Christy Moore or Planksty or was ever that interested or informed. And I think in hindsight, when I look back, it was very naive of me to think that I could fill shoes as big as those. And of course, Mick Hanley after Christy. So it was totally blind that I went into Moving Hearts. And when I look back on it now, and we had a wonderful time and we went all over Europe, all over America. But I remember we did a gig called The Bottom Line in New York. And down the back, there was a guy for the entire gig shouting, "Where's Christy?" And I was absolutely devastated. And I know that there were tears in the dressing room afterwards. And so I had a tough time with Moving Hearts. It wasn't an easy gig for me to do. And I wasn't the right person to be in Moving Hearts. I know that for sure.
Like, that's really interesting, isn't it, though? Because when you have a dynamic in the group, and especially Christy is a strong dynamic, but then through no fault of their own, I mean, you get somebody else into the group, but you're maybe not trying to replace them, but you still have to fill that gap. But the point is that everybody else who has been a fan of the person before sees that as filling the gap, and they're like, that's the wrong person. Well, I mean, what are you going to do? You're not going to get another Christy Moore. So you have to try and do something different, but it's very hard to please the people in that way.
Yeah, I think for the members of Moving Hearts, when they asked me to join, I think it was a decision. Okay, we're going to go in a completely different direction. I think, I mean, I've never discussed it with any of them, but I think they were probably trying to sex up their image a little bit, and maybe by getting a girl to front the band, it might get them that elusive record deal. What I do remember being with them on stage, some of the songs that I sang with Moving Hearts were so kind of laden with whatever political message, and it was just became very musically laden. But the joyous part of their music, and it was pure joy, was their instrumental work. It was just joyous, and there was a very huge gap in my mind. This is just a personal thing, but there was a very huge gap in their between their songs and their instrumentals. And so coming on to sing the songs, they wouldn't have been songs necessarily that I chose. And I refused to sing Hiroshima, Nagasaki, because I thought that's Christy's song, not singing that. But I'd sing, I sang other songs, but they were all kind of, they were all very politically laden down with politics. And so it was like that the politics was first and the music group part was second. But as a collective, as a band, they were extraordinary musicians, and their instrumental tunes were incredible.
Yes, Ireland has had and still has some great groups, trad groups, Altan, Dervish, and Induanua, all these kind of groups that are like rock, Celtic folk.
Yeah.
So the thing about it is, it's hard to change a band's style, isn't it? I mean, it's like if you replace, in Tuanua, and if Leslie Dowdall wasn't singing and you brought in a man singing in her place, or the same with, let's say, Altan or whatever. So it's very hard to do. And I mean, I commend you for doing it, but it probably wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't an easy job.
But as I said, the job was accepted by me purely out of naivety. I mean, I was young. I was 23, I think, when I joined Moving Hearts. So I hadn't a clue. I hadn't a clue about anything. I thought I did. So so it was kind of stupidity more than anything, and naivety that brought me into Moving Hearts. And when I look back on it, it was tough, and it damaged my confidence a lot, because New York wasn't the only gig where where abuse was shouted at me, but there were another new group of fans and whatever people that liked me in the band. But I mean, I know that if I was in the audience, I'd be thinking, what's she doing? She doesn't belong here. And I didn't belong there. But I did have some lovely moments. There was one of Moving Heart's many farewell tours. There was a gig in the Point Depot, which was televised for RTE, and everyone who'd ever worked with Moving Hearts had performed with them. We were all invited to do a couple of songs. I did a song with Moya from Clannad, and who else was there? I can't remember. It's so long ago, but it was 7,000 people in the the old, is it the 3 Arena now or whatever, but it was the Point Depot.
Yes, I think so. The Point Depot, yes.
And, I was more nervous about, as Donal only was introducing me, that they were going to start booing me. And I got a lovely reception, which was really nice.
Yes.
Yeah, no, if I had my time over again, that is, I would not have joined Moving Hearts.
Yeah. Because what happens in those situations, there are fans, staunch, diehard fans who listen, to all the music before, and they have their favorite members of the band. And then what happens, of course, somebody new comes in, but that new person and that new style can bring in new fans. So they don't see the big hullabaloo. They're like, oh no, she's great. I think it's fantastic. And maybe they didn't have the same time for Christy. They might have tuned in after you joined. So you're going to get both sets of fans, but you'll always have the staunch, diehard ones who will do the shouting and saying like, oh, bring back the other person, or,
Yeah. And I was, I was so young that I didn't have the capacity or the wherewithal to deal with the abuse that I got on a few occasions. I mean, now it would be a very different story. The Flo that I say here now would wipe the floor with them. I have no problem doing that. But I was just absolutely mortified. When I got shouted at, I would be mortified, and I would just want to kind of the ground to swallow me up. And I felt very on stage at times, considering it was a big band. There was 8 or 9 of us on stage. There were times when I felt very alone on stage.
Yes. Yes. And because of your obviously your working relationship with Bill Whelan and doing a lot of studio work, you had you were singing some songs over the years for the Irish selection in Eurovision, yes? So was that
Yes, that's part of my life that I'd like to forget. No, I sang in the National Song Contest twice. Was it twice? Yes, twice. Um, to this day, I don't actually know why I ever did that, because that was just so not me. Another one of those decisions, somebody asked me and I went, okay. The first time was, it was a Brendan Graham song. Was it a Brendan Graham song? I can't even remember who wrote the first song. But I know that I came, no, it wasn't. It was a guy called John McRae. And I came second to Linda Martin's Terminal 3, which she took to
okay?
Eurovision. So I think she beat me by about 2 points. Um, and the second time I did it was, oh God, I was in my late 20s. I can't even remember the name of the song. It wasn't a very good song. And
Was it why can't forever last?
that's the one. Don't, please don't play it. Yes. Oh my God. Yeah, no, it was just not a good song. And also, I mean, when I look at, to me, entering a competition as a singer, and I feel the same about X Factor and the National Song Contest, which, hands up, I did twice. It's the kiss of death. Why would you want to put yourself in a position for people to judge you in that way, and you're unlikely to win? So you have failed at that job. So how do you come back from that, as a performer? I would urge any young person not to enter a competition. Who is to say that Simon Cowell or whomever gets to decide whether you're good or bad? I just think there's so much wrong with it. And the same with, I mean, it's a national song contest and a Eurovision Song Contest, but it's not. And it's the performers that are the ones that are being judged ultimately.
Yeah, the problem is with a lot of these kind of competitions are, you know, whoever's doing the judging and stuff, they usually have their mind made up a lot earlier than we see. But they keep the other people in for the drama and the entertainment and the whole climax of revealing the winner. So it actually makes it harder, because if you're in a process where you're in a talent competition for 7 or 8 weeks and they know from the beginning he's going to win it or she's going to win it, it's only prolonging the disappointment for the other people. So it's all TV and entertainment, isn't it?
It's all TV and entertainment, and in particular in these modern day, X Factor type competitions, they don't care about the individuals, and it must be so difficult to be in the excitement of that kind of whirlwind of that whole showbiz thing, and then you get voted out one week, and that's it, you're done. You're back to your bedsit in wherever. I remember we were out in Dubai a couple of years ago, and we met Jamie Archer, who was an X Factor contestant, and he's a huge curly hair. He was a great singer. I don't know where he came in the competition, but he did reasonably well. But he was just doing that kind of circuit, sort of just going around singing to backing tracks, and that X Factor thing was only going to last for as long as people would still remember him.
And the shame about show business and entertainment is that when people see you in movies or on the telly or and whatever singing, they assume you've made it, and you're going to be successful and you're going to make lots of money. But the truth is, a lot of people don't, and then they have to go back to those cabaret things, to those cruise ships, to those working on the islands, wherever the islands may be, and they're just a jobbing musician then, and people meet them and they go, "Oh, you're the guy from X Factor or whatever." Oh, and they're kind of shocked because they're thinking, "I thought you'd be somewhere more successful." And that's the shame. These shows ruin. They build up everything too much.
Yeah, they actually ultimately ruin potential. And yeah, it's tough. And to be honest, as a woman now, the age that I'm at, I don't think it's a bad thing to work in a cruise ship or be part of a show like that, or to do cabaret. I mean, my thoughts on that, end of show business has changed, and the idea of what success is. I mean, for me now, success is just actually being able to get a gig and fill a room, and that magical hour and a half that you might have with a lovely audience in front of you, and the communication between both of you. That's success for me now. It's just still being able to do it.
That's it. Like being a performer in whatever genre or entertainment you're in, it's not about just what people seeing you on the front of the Daily Mirror or the Sun or whatever. It's about, as you said, being able to fill a room and for people to leave that and go, that was a great show and I really enjoyed it. And that doesn't matter if that's playing the Point Depot or playing, the small concert place down the road or whatever. It's just that people enjoy your show and you're successful in what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, I suppose for every musician, performer, actor, that's all changed now. So that frustration of not being able to do it is kind of hard, really hard.
Really hard, yeah. So then obviously, because you're a triple threat, you dance, you sing, you act. So where did the whole kind of acting and TV presenting come into it then? Because I'm sure when you were, playing with Moving Hearts and you were doing a lot of studio work, there was people saying to you, oh, you should be on TV or you should be an actress. Where did that all come about?
Well, TV happened because Billy McGrath, who was doing a producer director course out in RTE, and Declan Lowney, they were sort of training a load of new producer directors. And I knew Billy McGrath because Billy used to do PR for bands, and he did PR for Moving Hearts. And Billy asked me, would I present? He had to put together a sort of a half-hour kind of TV interview show. So he asked me and Liam Mackey, would we host it? So this was literally his show reel, or it was like his end of term exam. So we went to, there was a little studio, used to be a little studio somewhere in Ballsbridge, quite near the bridge. And so we went out there for a day and we filmed this mock TV program. I think Billy thought I could do it because I think he thought I had good personality and I like people and I talk to people. Whether that would translate onto camera, nobody knew. But anyway, we did it. And then the powers that be out in RTE, somebody high up saw the show, his show reel, and then Billy and Declan Lowney were doing TV Gaga. That was the first kind of that sort of young people's late night chat show, and somebody high up saw my part in Billy's show reel and said, what about Flo McSweeney? So they asked me would I be into auditioning for it. So I think I spent a day in RTE in front of cameras interviewing people, chatting, and that's how that started. So the first show I did was TV Gaga. So yeah, it was another one of those, somebody asking me, do you want to do this? And me going, okay, again. So that's how that happened. And then from there, I did Megamix with Declan Lowney. And of course, Declan went on to do Father Ted and has done great things. And then acting sort of happened because of Bill Whelan, because we were doing the music. He was doing the music for a series of Yeats plays in the Abbey Theatre. It was a festival of Yeats every year for 5 years. And they had a professor from Amory University in Washington who was a Yeats scholar. And he was very much behind this. He got sponsorship from Coca-Cola to do these plays. So the first year, Bill Whelan wrote all the music and he asked me to do the vocals and we recorded them in Windmill Lane. And then I met the director, Jim, the American professor, and we got on great. In the second year, he cast me in it. And then I was in it for every year. So I did it for 5 years, every summer in the Abbey. And then while I was like, my timelines get mixed up, but I ended up, pretty much because of the experience I got doing that. I did a few other small plays and small pieces. I loved acting. I did enjoy it. I love stage acting. I'd be crap on film. But and then I got my biggest part probably was playing Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Gate Theatre. And that was amazing. That was just an extraordinary experience. I was 32, 33 when I did that.
the more then that you kind of moved into TV, did you find then that it slowed down your singing work, or were you able to do both of them hand in hand?
Um, little bit of both. I sort of, the weird thing was when I was doing Megamix, which was purely music program. I mean, it was like sort of Ireland's Top of the Pops, or a mix of Top of the Pops and the Tube. We did it from Christchurch. What was it called? The Cathedral Club. And so it was a big church setting, and it was an amazing venue. And there were, we used to film on a Wednesday or Tuesday or a Wednesday. And so all the bands that were coming from various countries that were coming to the UK to do Top of the Pops would come to Dublin first and do Megamix. So we got a lot of bands who were like just about to release a single. I think Bros did one of their first TV appearances was Megamix. I didn't know who they were, and it's all these little kind of poppy bands. So when I was doing Megamix, there were times when I'd look at all the bands on stage and think, oh, I want to do this. But I was living in the UK at the time of the first series of Megamix. I was living in London, and I was doing a lot of session work, singing, doing backing vocals for other bands, and very well paid. And I was in a band, an English band called The Rest Is History. So there is floating around somewhere in the ether on, it might be even on YouTube. We actually did The Rest Is History, did Megamix, performed in it. Yeah, which was brilliant. And before we went on, Sean Hughes, who's no longer with us, sadly, Sean Hughes was our barman on Megamix. He was sort of in the background cleaning glasses, and there was never any booze at that bar.
I remember like you and Kevin Sharkey on it, and he was Sean Hughes would be like just like the proverbial barman cleaning the glasses with the rag and stuff. Did he have? Am I wrong? Did he have some speaking part in it as well, or did he talk? No.
Oh, he did. No, he did. He didn't kind of present as such, but he did bits. He would do bits on it, and he was. I mean, I remember thinking he was really young. Because when I was my mid-20s at that point, and he was probably in his early 20s. And when you're in your 20s and there's a 3 or 4 year age gap, you kind of think, oh, kids these days. Yeah. And I remember Sean Hughes leaving after the first, at the end of the first series, and he said he was going to the UK to try his luck as a stand-up. And I thought, oh, good luck. That's the last we'll see of him. And sure, he went on to great things. And then after Sean Hughes, Paul Tylock, who's a wonderful actor and comedian, Paul Tylock became the barman on the second series. But Megamix was great. It was really good fun, great fun. And Kevin Sharkey and I.
Yeah. How many episodes?
We only did 2. There were 2 series. There might have been 12 in each one, or there may only have been 6. I actually cannot remember how many we did, but it seemed to last. We used to do it in the winter, because I remember when we finished the first season, Kevin Sharkey and I went to Lanzarote for 2 weeks, and I thought it was the most exotic thing to go on a sun holiday in February, because it probably was. And I had a
amazing, yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because it's like now you're thinking, oh, I'm going to Dubai or somewhere really exotic, and people are like, Lanzarote, I've been there a million times,
I know,
the first time going is always amazing.
Oh, yeah. And people are like that now about places like Dubai. It's like Dubai is like, the world's got smaller and it's easier to travel. But I mean, this is kind of early mid-80s, 83, 84. So, didn't travel to the same degree. But I remember we had 2 weeks in February, and it was hot in Lanzarote with Kevin, and we had great fun.
So then, obviously, when you were doing that, did that put you in the position for No Frontiers later on, or how did that come about?
I suppose it did, but I mean, when I think of it, it was a long time. After what did I do after Megamix? I mean, I didn't do any more TV, and I was never that interested in television presenting, and I don't mean that disrespectfully to those who do it. it wasn't my passion. Music, singing was always my passion, but I tended to get very distracted, easily distracted by offers of other jobs. So I never really kind of gave it a moment's thought. When Megamix finished, I was grand, back to music. And then I met my husband and we had our first son. And my son was about 20 months old and we were living in an apartment on Pembroke Road. And my husband had gone to Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival for the month of August. And we were going to go out for a weekend, but it was going to be a long month, me on my own with the baby. And my husband was in a comedy group called Mr. Trellis, which was Ardal O'Hanlon, Kevin Gildee, and my husband Barry Murphy. And so I'd say it was only a couple of days after Barry had left for Edinburgh that a call came from Frontier Films. And I thought they were looking for Barry. And I was, a baby in one arm. And I was getting impatient. I was going, yeah, well, you can contact him in Edinburgh. This is number. He said, no, we want to talk to you. And I believe that afterwards that it was Ferdy McGanna who had suggested me to Gerald Heffernan from Frontier Films, and they were looking for presenters for No Frontiers. So I'm very, very lucky in that I had great support from my parents and my twin brother. And so they said, would you be free to kind of, this could have been Monday or Tuesday, it's like, would you be free on Friday to go to the south of France for 3 days filming, and let's do one story. Wow. For No Frontiers and see how it goes, take it from there. So I didn't think beyond the 3 days in France. I rang my brother and my mother, and between them, they looked after my son. So I went, did the story, and it's like picking up an old hat and an old coat and putting it back on. It went really well. And I came back from there, and then I was maybe a week later, I was in a taxi with my son on the way to the airport to go to Edinburgh. And I got a call saying from Frontier Films saying that the heads in RTE really liked me and they wanted to offer me the position of the kind of main presenter, which meant 12 trips a year, all kind of condensed between sort of April and October. And I remember it was maybe Friday and I was going to Edinburgh for the weekend, and 10 days later I was in Africa, in Zimbabwe. So that's how, yeah. And that was an amazing.
Yeah, because obviously, when people look at shows like this and, the travel shows or these people who work, finding houses, what's that famous English one, Away in the Sun or something, I can't remember the name.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Remember that? And so these kind of shows, and they think, oh my God, these presenters have a great life. They're traveling the world and seeing these amazing things. But they're obviously, you see them for the time they're on. But when you used to go on those working holidays, were they was it always fun, or was there times that you thought this is crazy?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I think I did, I can't remember whether I did 3 or 4 seasons. I think it was 4. By the time we were doing the last season, there were big budget cuts, and so we had less of a crew going. Initially, in the first year, there would be 5 of us, and there'd be an assistant who was like assistant to the director, who would also kind of help me. And you would have, if you were going on a long haul flight, you'd have a good 5-6 days away, day of rest, day to recover. By the last year that I did, I think Catherine Thomas had come in at that point, and they were doing sort of backpacker trips with her. And it was literally Catherine and then a camera person who would do sound as well. So, of course, that was, great for their budget. But by the end, there was literally just a director, camera, sound, and me. And I remember we went to Australia, to Sydney, and I flew out on a Wednesday. And and arrived at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, not working till the following morning, I'll get, good rest, sleep. I think I slept for 2 hours, wandering around Sydney Harbour. And the next morning at 8 a.m., I was climbing Sydney Harbour Bridge on no sleep. I looked like crap the last two series because I was so wrecked all the time. So it was hard work. So you didn't have, I mean, you were literally in and out. So it wasn't like you had 2 days off and you could lounge around on a beach or by a pool. When you were working, it was a heavy schedule, usually, involving the local tourism office. So we'd have somebody with us and they would have a packed schedule for us. So it was exhausting. It was exhausting. But at the same time, I do look back now. I remember I've said this before, in other interviews, but it's a moment in time that stands out. Flying over Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe in a helicopter where no health and safety. They'd taken the door off the helicopter to accommodate our cameraman who was strapped into the back, but I was still hanging onto the back of his trousers. And he was leaning out and he was filming, and there was the Victoria Falls waterfall beneath us. There was a bull elephant female and their baby, all trunk to tail, walking along what looked like the edge of the waterfall, and there was a rainbow beneath us. And that piece of film was used in the opening titles for all the years that No Frontiers was there. But I remember that moment and thinking, wow, someday you'll be at home scrubbing your kitchen floor and remembering this.
Yes. Well, I mean, amazing moments because, when you're a musician and you're touring the world or traveling the world, you get to see amazing things. But obviously on a travel show, you're filming it for the audience and you're presenting and talking about it and everything. But I think, there's two sides to it. There's the side where you're really having fun, but then you have to set up the shots. You have to, practice what you're going to say, not to mention tourists. I'm sure you had some headaches with tourists around the camera and everything, no?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but you deal with that, and we often met, in Irish tourists in the strangest of places. But no, we never had any real hassle. But some wonderful moments, and went and saw some incredible things. So I mean, I know I was very lucky and very privileged to do it. And then when I had my daughter, I knew that I needed to. I knew I was going to have to stop, that I couldn't continue doing it. But I think at the same time, they had decided as well to move in a different direction. So it kind of, my time with them came to an end, but I had no regrets at that stage.
Yeah. And, obviously, for you at that time, finishing up with it. But I had read, obviously, in some articles that, you weren't that happy the way they did it. And unfortunately, that's TV. Sometimes decisions are made and people are replaced, and they try to change things, but sometimes the delivery of the message can be done better. No,
I totally agree. And I think as you get older, you realize, everybody is replaceable, every single person, and you're not special. I think there's a thing when you're younger, I'm sure I was probably guilty of it, where you think, all these wonderful things are happening to me because of course they are, because I'm fabulous. And, common sense prevails when you get older and you realize, no, you're not special. You're the same as everybody else. And there's always somebody younger snapping at your heels. Sometimes somebody better. Nobody was snapping at my heels at all. I was always treated with respect by my co-workers, but the powers that be, I suppose what hurt me most of all was that I had gone into the office with my 3-week-old baby daughter to say hello to everyone. Maybe a week earlier, and the following morning, when I came home, the following morning, my Dear John letter arrived in the post. So when I visited the office, everybody knew that I was getting that letter. So I think a phone call after 4 years would have been far more respectful than the Dear John letter that I got.
Yeah, sometimes, isn't it, when people have that kind of relationship and that you think is respectful and you think caters to look after everyone's interests, somebody makes that stupid decision, this will be the best way to do it, or it's the easiest, it's a cop out, it's like, let's do it this way and we'll save ourselves. But I mean, you ruin relationships then, don't you?
Yeah, but I think the truth of it is that there are people who don't care about ruining relationships. It's on to the next person. It's that, I suppose there is a big difference between the hierarchy in big business and the people that work for them. So there are people that don't treat their employees with respect. They see them as replaceable, and they may well be, but I think one should always treat people with respect, because your own time will come, comes to everyone.
For sure. So around that time, obviously, things were really going well for you, and you were doing a lot. But obviously, you met Barry Murphy, your husband, and both of you were involved in the arts. Barry's a comedian, and he was, I think, at that time, I think he doing TV at that time. But was that hard at the beginning? Was that hard having two people in the celebrity world, and was it difficult to stay on level ground with all that around you?
No, not at all, because neither one of us would consider ourselves celebrity. Neither one of us court that kind of celebrity. I may have in my early 20s, but certainly not. Barry and I would both have the same attitude. You go do your job, you come home. We live in an ordinary house in suburbia. We had, two kids. Never in competition with each other. It just wasn't like that. We don't think of it like that. He has always seen his job as his work as his job, and all the nonsense that goes with it, he's not interested in, and neither am I. So if we're both really quite grounded people. We might be a bit mad, but we're grounded, and family life was normal, and I think timing was such that when Après-Match kind of took off and our kids were young, it gave him the opportunity to do what he needed to do, what he was, having great success at. And I looked after the kids. Excuse me. So it just worked out. And then, as someone said to me, oh, you disappeared completely and you weren't working at all. I was doing voiceovers and jingles and things like that. And I did a couple of animation series where I did voice some characters. So I just wasn't doing big high profile stuff. So I had many years of just being at home and doing that kind of work. And it was great. Loved it.
And that's it, yeah, because it's like ebb and flow in people, especially in with couples who are both involved in the arts. There's peaks and troughs, and sometimes one person has more happening at that time or more high profile, and the other person mightn't. But these can change. So I mean, like you said, people might say, oh, you're not doing as much, but maybe they were looking at Barry and saying he's doing a lot, but you still had all your stuff going on in your own world.
Yeah, and it was, I joined a voiceover agency, kind of in my late 30s, maybe early 40s, and I got lots of work voicing commercials, and it was wonderful. It was the right kind of work for me to be doing at that stage. I remember when my daughter was, she was 4 weeks old, 5 weeks old max, and I got a call, could I be in Windmill Lane Studios? This was at midday. Could you be in Windmill Lane for a voiceover at 2? And it's fine, you can bring the baby. And I thought, oh God, I really don't know. And that's her nap time and whatever. And I said, well, who's it for? And they said, Vodafone. And I said, I'll be there. And I went in to do that job. And I was so fortunate that I had a daughter who never cried. She just smiled at everyone. But I remember walking into the studio, and there was about 7 or 8 people in the control room. So the more people, usually the bigger the job from the agency and the client.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a Vodafone. And when I think of the amount of money they spend on their TV ads, and they choose the voiceover 2 hours before they need her, is mad. But it ended up being a 4-year campaign for me. And it was, I'll do the voice. I had dropped my voice. It was, life's better with Vodafone. How are you? And it was the How Are You campaign. And it was 4 years.
I remember hearing that. That's like, these ads stay in your subconscious, and the voices and the lines.
They do, yeah. Well. Yeah. And that ended up being 4 years I did that job for. So had I said that day, no, I'm not coming. But when I heard it was Vodafone, I thought Vodafone's a good one to get. And the weird thing is, unlike other things with advertising, if you get a big campaign like that and your voice is recognizable within the industry and everyone knows it's you, instead of it cutting you off from doing other things, it actually leads to more. I got so much work around that time. So between sort of 40 and 50, I was doing loads. Now, because of my age, I get jobs like panty liners for older women to prevent leakage.
And can I ask you that actually to prevent leakage? Yeah. Can I ask you in that, like when you're doing voiceovers, do they kind of say to you, oh, well, you're this age now, your voice sounds a bit different? Or do
Completely.
you say, oh no, but I can speak like a 40-year-old?
That's what I think. But I have been told, no, you're now in the. At one point I was wondering why I wasn't getting as much work as I used to, and I went onto the web page of the agency, and I saw, age 50 to 60 or something, and I thought, oh, for God's sake. Whereas I feel, I mean, my singing voice has improved with age. On my album, I don't think you could tell my age from listening to my album, and I don't think I have. I think I suppose it's when I'm listening to 24-year-olds selling 55-plus-year-olds face cream, I find that irritates me. I would prefer to hear a woman of my own age or a woman with a more mature voice. But I don't think my voice has radically changed. But I know I can't pay 35, but I reckon I could do 45 plus.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it, though? Because there are probably people, in the industry, so-called voice experts who go, no, that's the voice of this age and that's the voice of that age. So they're listening and they maybe make the decisions and say, no, you need this younger sounding voice. And for the normal person, they might go, they sound pretty much the same. And they go, no, I can tell the age. So maybe it's very technical how they make the decisions.
Yeah, but they are also now using voices to me that just sound ridiculously young, selling products to older women, and I don't get that. Also, I do remember a moment where I heard an Irish accent doing a voiceover that sounded slightly American. Where the sort of TY, the continuity, is no longer continuity; it's continuity. And I remember the first time I heard those kind of voices on radio, I thought, that's it now, changed. So the accent has changed. We've become quite Americanized.
Yeah, and I saw something recently where they were talking, somebody was saying about like some of the Irish ads sometimes can be for Landis or Centra or different companies, can be quite Irish. I mean, they're trying to really put well, come down to the, and it's very, they're like cheery chappies, and they're really trying to put that across, and they kind of exaggerated a lot.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true. But what I do like is the fact that there are more regional accents used on radio and television commercials. Whereas back in the day, it's like you had to have the RTE Donnybrook Dublin 4 accent to get any kind of, if you listen to ads from the 80s, the male voiceovers in particular were all very sort of, it was very much sort of almost like a Gay Byrne type of accent, very proper and correct. Whereas now they're more representative of the whole country, which is the way it should be.
It's funny you mentioned that because I know that on one of your voiceover shows you worked with Alan Stanford, who used to be in Glenroe and everything. But I remember for years, all of the ads on television seemed to have Alan Stanford's voice.
He did, yeah. I mean, he would have had his time in the sun like us all. It's a popularity thing too. I mean, at the moment it's Baz Ashwami. He's on a lot. Who else? I think it's Joanne McNally. She's a comedian. I'm hearing her a lot. That happens. I mean, my time was between 40 and 50 where I was on everything. And I was also doing jingles as well. So, I had the best of both worlds. Jingles aren't as popular anymore, but back in the 80s and 90s, early 90s in particular, it was always about a jingle. So, there was a company called Ear to Ear that wrote jingles for TV commercials, and I did all of their work. I did at one point through an Irish producer. It was an American ad agency from Boston, and they had the account for CVS drugstores. and I basically did about 30 jingles for CVS drugstores for sort of paid with Irish money, as in sort of like Irish rates. And it was only when I was in New York about 3 years later and I heard the ad in the CVS drugstore and I heard my voice, I thought, oh my God, if I was living here in America and I had done that job, I could have probably retired on it. Which is why they came to Dublin to do it in the first place.
Yeah. They came over. They were like, yeah, we get some cheaper people over here.
I get it. It's what they do.
The great thing about it is you've had a very varied career, because you've been presenting, you've been singing, you've been a backing singer, you've been a lead singer, you've had a little stint in Eurovision, the song contest, of course. You've done voiceover. So, I mean, your career has been so varied and diverse.
Yeah, it has. I mean, and there's sometimes on a down day where I think, oh, what have I achieved? And then, on a good day, I think, oh, you've done a lot. I have done a lot. Not finished yet, but it has been diverse. And I think it's because I was able to be, it's funny nowadays, it would be more acceptable as a performer, as an artist, that, you act and you can sing and you whatever. Back in the 80s, it was a little bit, I sometimes felt that I wasn't taken seriously because I diverted into so many different mediums, but it was because I was able to do it. I felt that I was kind of good at most of the things I did, says she.
But that's what you need. You need to know, for you now, obviously with whatever work you have or whatever work is coming in, do you have any kind of aspirations or ambitions for the next few years, what you'd like to do or anything different?
I wouldn't say different. A big thing for me was 2 years ago, I recorded my first solo album at age 57 when I recorded it. And I recorded, I'm very proud of this album. I co-produced it with Fiachra Trench, who's a well-known composer and string arranger. He's worked with Van Morrison, Paul McCartney. He lives in Dublin, or in Wicklow rather, and his son Rian co-produced it and engineered it. And his collection of songs, they weren't original songs, but a collection of some old jazz tunes, but there's Tom Waits, there's Randy Newman, there's Leonard Cohen's song, Paul Buchanan from the Blue Nile, I did one of his songs, and I had a quartet come in from the RT Symphony Orchestra, played on it, had a wonderful brass section. I mean, so I'm very proud of that album, and it was a big thing for me to do because, I mean, I wasn't doing it with the backing of a record company, so I financed it myself, which is a big thing to do, and you're not going to make that money back. Unfortunately, timing was bad. That when I released it, I was unwell, and then COVID happened, so I've never really gotten to tour it, but I would really like to do another album. That's my aim.
Brilliant. That's really nice.
So for anybody who's watching, you will find my album on all platforms, all digital platforms, and it's Flo McSweeney, Picture in a Frame, which is the title track, and it's a Tom Waits song, and I sang that song at my mother's funeral, so it's very special. Very special for me, and I dedicated the album to my parents.
Yeah, it has a lot of meaning. Well, I mean, that's really good. And I hope, obviously, with, the way things are, that in the next year or two, you can get to do your new album and next album. And this time, maybe tour it, and get it out there so people can listen to it. Because, you have a fabulous voice and you have a great presence on stage, and whether it be in front of TV or on stage in theatres. So all I want to say is, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure listening to your stories. It's so interesting. And, there's lots of hidden gems in there, and you've done great things. And all we can do is wish you the best for the future, Flo. And thank you once again. Flo McSweeney, everybody.
Thank you, Simon. And to you. Best of luck to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Flo. I really enjoyed that interview. And it was a pleasure having you on the show. And thank you for telling us all about your life so far. Lots of good things to come, I'm sure. You've had a very varied and interesting career. And I'm sure people will enjoy hearing about your exploits on the TV, in the recording studios and everything. So once again, we thank you. Okay, everybody, we look forward to seeing you on next week's show. And we just want to say to you, have a lovely weekend, have a lovely week. Take care of yourself. I hope you're enjoying, the holidays or whatever still. And we look forward to having you on the show next time. So look after yourself, look after the people you love, and take care. Bye-bye.